Thanks.
I mean, like the Kleinberg Irish model came out exactly that
It sounds like something I should know.
It's cute.
Welcome to the afternoon session. There will be 2 talks. And the open problem session has been cancelled, but actually Wahab, that is giving the last talk, wanted to present an open problem, so he will do it at the end of his talk.
And I would also present
you also,
things.
Great. And he also likes to present an open, so our speakers of this afternoon solved the problem.
Right.
So Slivkins will talk about bandits and agents, how to incentivize first. Thank you.
Hi, is the mic? All right. Thanks for coming. I hope we're all re-energized after lunch. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about incentivizing exploration. It's about a line of work joined with Ishai, Vasilis, and Steven. So our motivation comes from recommender systems, and there is a whole bunch of them out there. I mean, they can tell us which movie to watch, where to dine, which doctor to see, and so forth. And also, some of our stuff is relevant to medical trials, and I'll talk about that connection in the end of the talk. Okay, so let's make it slightly more concrete. So we're looking at the recommender system, and the following scenario. A user shows up, he wants to choose a product among some alternatives. Then the user receives a recommendation and maybe some extra feedback like ratings or something. Then he chooses a product and hopefully also leaves a feedback and leaves. Okay, so one thing to notice here is that the recommendation is usually based on the feedback from the users that came before, and the feedback will be used to improve recommendations in the future. So, in other words, each user has this dual role, being both a consumer and a producer of information. Okay, so right. So, in the interest of a common good, the population of users should balance exploration and exploitation. And one way to achieve that is to coordinate using the recommendations of the system. And of course, if people only cared about common good, they would all follow the recommendations. But then, of course, the users are actually self-interested agents, and so they're not very altruistic, and instead they will try to do what is best for them based on the information that they have and maybe the initial biases that they might have. So, okay, and that may, this kind of selfish behavior may really stand in the way of exploration. I mean, for a simple example, what if users are initially slightly biased against one of the alternatives? Then it may just happen that that alternative will be completely unexplored or, not explored to the sufficient extent. So it's kind of bad. So the kind of big question here is how to incentivize self-interested agents to explore. Okay, so let's make it slightly more concrete. I mean, we'd like to incentivize agents to try out actions that seem suboptimal, either because of the agent's biases or because of the current information in the system. And even if the system currently knows that this does not seem like the best action, a bandit algorithm would still like to explore it a little bit, right? Okay. There is a lot of prior work on trying to do that in practice in several different ways. I mean, One could offer payments to potential patients to participate in a medical trial, for example, or one could offer sort of, merit badges, a promise of a higher social status to people who leave high-quality reviews on something that needs to be reviewed. Or there may be hope to just free ride on people's desire to experiment. I mean, some people just like experimenting. But, all of that is good, it has its place, but there are some issues with it. I mean, one is like, it's not always possible. I mean, you may not have enough money to pay to enough patients, for example. And the other thing is all of that is prone to selection bias because, you'll end up seeing, more patients that are poor, or, you'll get reviews from these weird bunch of people who appreciates merit badges, or, you'll get, you'll see lots of people who like risks and so forth. So, it's not necessarily that the population that you're going to see that way is going to represent the actual population. And I mean, there are ways to kind of mitigate this and stuff, but here we try to explore an alternative approach. So we'd like to use information asymmetry, that is the fact that the algorithm in general knows more than any given agent, in order to create a sort of intrinsic incentives. In other words, we want the agent to kind of follow our recommendation just because we recommended it to him. Okay, so that's kind of a high-level goal. Now it's a good time to lay out a basic model, and I mean, it's already, although it's kind of simple, it's already kind of challenging, actually quite a bit challenging, and I'll talk about a few extensions in the end of the talk. So it's basically a bandit problem with an extra constraint because of incentives. So we have k actions, t rounds. Say t is known in advance. In each round, a new agent arrives. The algorithm recommends an action and maybe some extra information. The agent chooses an action and reports the reward. And it's like, as usual in Bandits, let's assume everything is bounded in the 0-1 interval. Okay, then let's assume IID rewards. In other words, the distribution of a reward depends only on the chosen action, not on the round. The mean rewards are not known, but we have a Bayesian prior on everything, and let's assume it's a common prior, meaning like, everybody has the same prior, both all agents and the algorithm. Okay, so let's say the objective of the algorithm is social welfare, in other words, the cumulative reward. Okay, so if all agents just follow recommendations, it is precisely a bandit problem, which is well understood and stuff. Okay, but now we have, selfish agents. So we need to account for their incentives, and so we need to ensure that following recommendation is in their best interest. So, okay, let's express that precisely. So we say that the recommendation algorithm is Bayesian incentive compatible if, given the fact that we receive that the recommendation in round T is a particular action A, one can do a Bayesian, one can take a conditional expectation and realize that actually the best thing is to follow that action. And we want that to hold for all actions and all rounds. So if an algorithm satisfies it, we call it Bayesian incentive compatible. So that's the constraint that we want. And so the goal is to design BIC bandit algorithms with good performance. And one particular thing we could ask is, well, can BIC bandit algorithms perform as well in some sense as the best bandit algorithms BIC or not? Or, how much do we need to lose? Okay, so let me kind of discuss a few things. So, clearly the algorithm wants to balance explore and exploit, but actually we have this three-way trade-off here between explore, exploit, and incentives. So, the algorithm may want to choose suboptimal arms for the sake of getting more information, but the agents don't want that. Each agent just wants to do the best thing. And in particular, the agent will choose the best thing based on what she knows, which is three things: the common prior, the recommendation algorithm itself, and the algorithm's recommendation, and maybe some extra information, if any. Okay, so in particular, we assume that the agent does not see the entire feedback from the past. Instead, it only sees whatever the algorithm chooses to reveal. And this is kind of an important point because, like, if all information is revealed, it really doesn't work, because then basically the only thing that we could convince the agent to do is to take the exploit action, and we know that exploitation only is not a good thing. In particular, like, it's easy to see that there are problem instances in which, if we do it this way, then the algorithm can only pick this one arm that seems best according to the prior, and this may really not be the right arm in the realization. Okay, so we see that the algorithm needs to reveal less than it actually knows. Well, how much does it need to reveal? So it turns out one can sort of do a revelation argument to show that, like, it suffices to reveal only the recommended arm and no extra information. In other words, if there is like anything we could do by revealing more information, we can also do the same thing if we only reveal the recommended arm. So now, kind of without loss of generality, I am going to assume that the only thing revealed is the recommended arm. Okay, so what's the general approach here is that we are going to try to hide a little exploration in a lot of exploitation. And like, why can it possibly work? Well, you see, each agent knows that he gets exploitation choice with high probability, and maybe exploration with low probability, and he doesn't know which, right? But kind of on a balance, we can tune the probabilities so that he still follows the recommendation, because he knows that most likely it was exploitation. Now, it kind of explains why it can possibly work, but it's very far from saying it will work or it will work optimally, right? So okay, now it's a place to mention some related work. So okay, of course it relates to a bunch of work on bandits, most notably on bandits with IID rewards, with or without a prior. It's kind of the most fundamental results. And also to some stuff on the best arm prediction, and also to some other lines of work which involves kind of combination of bandits with incentives. But all of that work is kind of technically very different, on kind of very different topics. And there is some kind of closely related work in economics. So the kind of initial paper which asked this question was one by Kramer, Mansour, and Perry, and they looked at essentially the same model, but only with 2 arms and deterministic rewards. And they do kind of their main result is the Bayesian optimal algorithm for deterministic rewards, and they have only a preliminary result for the IID rewards. Also, there is a really nice paper by Frazier et al., which looks at a closely related problem, but kind of different. It's a kind of same problem, but the payments are allowed, and agents observe the entire past, and the point is to achieve optimal trade-off between the payment and the, and the utility. I mean, how much you pay to the agents and how much utility you get. So it's kind of related, but kind of in flavor, it's very different. And also, there are some connections to some high-profile work in economics, say something called a Bayesian persuasion. It essentially describes a single round of our model, well, a single round of a generalization of our model. And the work on strategic experimentation, it's kind of similar setting where multiple agents are jointly learning, but there is no principle. I mean, there is no recommender. Okay, so that's that. Now, let me talk a little bit about the main result and some of the key ideas. And I'll mention some other results later on. So, first, I mean, how do we measure performance? Let's not be too original here. We'll talk about regret. Right, so we can define the expected total reward of the algorithm. We can define, well, something that we call ex-post regret, which is kind of the usual regret, like for a given problem instance. And then we can talk about Bayesian regret, which is expectation of ex-post regret over the prior, right? So our main result is about Bayesian regret. And I mean, kind of, in general, we can ask, can BIC Bandit algorithms achieve optimal regret, right? And in some sense, the answer is yes. So the main result is a black box reduction. So we can take any Bandit algorithm that you like, and we can convert it into a BIC Bandit algorithm with a similar performance in the sense that its Bayesian regret is blown up only by a constant factor. The constant factor can depend on the prior, but it's only constant. So, if that was optimal, it's still optimal up to a constant. I mean, it depends on the prior, not on the time horizon. That's the point. Also, one could look at a version of a Bandit algorithm which also outputs a prediction. I mean, usually it's a prediction of which arm is the best arm, but it could be a prediction of something else. And we also get that kind of reduction. I mean, our new algorithm also outputs predictions. And essentially what happens is that the learning rate, I mean, the speed of learning decreases by a constant factor, by only a constant factor. So this kind of result is nice in the sense that it's modular. I mean, like we can take an existing system and we sort of inject incentives into that system. And kind of modular design is a good way and sometimes, the only feasible way to design complicated systems. The other thing to notice is that the setup can incorporate auxiliary information such as a prior, because we can take an algorithm that uses that information, and the original algorithm can also incorporate maybe some preferences over which arms should be favored or throttled in exploration, and kind of our reduction obeys that too. Finally, like I said, the prediction does not have to be the best arm. I mean, we could be interested about which arms are low performing, and then we may hope to prune them away using regulation or something. So for all we care about, the algorithm here could be predicting the worst arm, and it still works. Okay, let me say a few words about how this thing works. And kind of the basic question to answer is how can we possibly hope to sample the other arm? I mean, say if arm 1 is favored by the prior, there are only 2 arms, how can we possibly, convince the agent to try arm 2? Right, so like I said before, the idea is to hide exploration in a large pool of exploitation. So here's what I mean. For the first couple of rounds, we play arm 1, because that's kind of the only thing we can do. Then we pick up kind of exploit arm through a posterior update. I mean, we do a Bayesian update, we arrive at the posterior, and we choose the best arm according to the posterior. We call it the exploit arm. Now, in the remainder, we use the exploit arm in every round except one round chosen uniformly at random. And in that kind of explore round, we recommend arm 2. And K and L are the parameters here. So what is going on here? I mean, the first thing, if we collect enough samples of arm 1, then we make sure that it's possible for arm 2 to be the exploit arm. There is a non-zero probability that it could happen. And then when an agent is recommended arm 2, it doesn't know why. It could be because it's exploration, or it could be because arm 2 is now the exploit arm. So good, and then we kind of use the fact that exploration happens with a low probability, and then we can rig it so that the agent actually wants to follow recommendation, because he knows that exploitation was way more likely, and it kind of overweighs the downside of exploration. So that kind of explains how we can possibly try one arm, but okay, now we need to turn it into a good algorithm. So the actual black box reduction, I mean, let me present it just for two arms. It consists of two phases, the two stages, the sampling stage and the simulation stage. The sampling stage is just like we need to sample each arm, and it proceeds essentially as I said before. Now we have a simulation stage where we actually simulate the algorithm, and it proceeds in phases such that in each phase we call the original algorithm once. So here's how it goes. In the beginning of each phase, we compute, we do the Bayesian update, we compute the exploit arm. So we choose exploit arm in every round except one, and that one round shows the uniformly at random. And in that one round, we make a call to the original algorithm, and we feed it back the reward. That's it, right? And again, if we collect enough initial samples, then we can ensure that any arm could be the exploit arm here. So when the agent receives the recommendation for arm 2, it doesn't know why. And then we make the probability of calling the algorithm low enough so that the agent is incentivized to follow recommendation. And the proof needs to go through some technicalities, but that's essentially it. And also, so that's it for two arms. To analyze performance, now it's kind of easy. The main thing to observe is that the expected Bayesian reward of the exploit arm is at least as good as that of the algorithm, just by definition of the exploit arm. We chose the best we could, and the algorithm itself could be exploring for all we know. So that just means we kind of track the rewards of the algorithm, except the learning speed of the algorithm is delayed because we're calling it only once in every phase. And so that kind of easily leads to abundant regret. Okay. Likewise, if the original algorithm outputs a prediction in each round, then this new algorithm just outputs the same prediction in all rounds of the next phase, and that's it. And trivially, the distribution of the prediction in each round T is distributed exactly as the prediction of the original algorithm. So it just means that the learning is slowed down by a constant factor. Okay, there are a bunch of more technicalities to kind of extend it to k-arms, but I'm going to skip in the interest of time because I want to mention a few other things. Okay.
So I guess if you had the choice of which A to use, you'd want pure exploration, right?
If I had a choice of what?
Among algorithms A that you could potentially use, just given the description, wouldn't you prefer pure exploration for that one step?
You mean algorithms that optimize pure exploration?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. It depends what you want. If you want to have good Bayesian regret, you will probably start with an algorithm with good Bayesian regret. If you only care about the quality of prediction, then you wouldn't care about Bayesian regret. Right. Okay, so it's kind of easy to see that the problem, there are some priors for which the problem is completely hopeless. For example, if the prior is such that the mean reward of arm 1 and the difference between the two rewards are independent, then initially we can only try arm 1, and no matter how many samples of arm 1 we have, we cannot possibly convince any agent to try arm 2 because it doesn't give us any information about the difference. Okay, so in this case, the algorithm is doomed to always try arm 1. Okay, so it means we need to make some assumption to make it work. And our assumption is as follows. So essentially, if we take enough samples of arm 1, then arm 2 can become exploit arm. So the blue thing just says that arm 2 does become the exploit arm after case samples of arm1. And this happens with, a non-zero probability. So in some sense, it's kind of a fighting chance assumption. I mean, to give the algorithm a fighting chance. And we show it's necessary. I mean, it's necessary for any BAC algorithm in order to try arm2. And it is sufficient for the black box reduction for the case of 2 arms. And for more than 2 arms, we have a similar condition. We cannot prove it's necessary, but this condition includes a nice case of, a natural case of independent priors. Okay, so in the remainder, let me mention a few other results. So, okay, I guess it's kind of shifting gears at the moment. So, we also have another result obtaining good, ex post regret, meaning good regret for any given realization of the prior, and essentially it is the best. I mean, up to constant factor, it's the optimal regret both with the instant dependent sense and in the worst case. And but we have this log t term with the constant that depends on the prior, and it could get arbitrarily large depending on the prior. So one way to think about it, it is the price that we pay for incentive compatibility. It's in this, which is in this term. Essentially, this term is about how difficult it is to convince an agent to try arm2, which essentially is about how concentrated is the prior on the goodness of arm1. If the prior says that, okay, arm1 is really got to be much better, then okay, I will need many, many rounds to convince. But it's kind of inevitable, at least intuitively. Okay, another result. Oh yeah, and in some sense, kind of essentially resolves this problem for a constant number of arms. Okay, but another result is that the black box reduction actually works essentially in the same way in a much more general setting when the algorithm observes a context. It could be like a customer profile at Amazon. Then, the algorithm recommends an arm or make a prediction. Then the agent chooses that arm and reports her reward and maybe extra feedback. And then the distribution of the reward and the feedback depends not only on the arm, but also on the context. So it's kind of contextual bandits with extra feedback. So the extra feedback could be, I go to a restaurant and I leave not just kind of my overall satisfaction score with the meal, but a detailed review of every dish, right? And on the economic side, it kind of allows agents to be a little different from one another. On the machine learning side, it essentially allows to kind of plug in 3 major lines of work on bandits, one on contextual bandits, one on bandits with more feedback than just a chosen arm, and one on bandits with reductions. And and the reduction is completely oblivious to the algorithm, so we can take our favorite algorithm. Okay, and the final thing that I wanted to mention is a slightly more complicated setup where in each round, instead of a single agent showing up, we have a batch of agents that show up and play a game. So one agent's actions could impact other agents' actions. And it could be a game with noisy payoffs, but it has to be the same game in every round, right? So agents show up, the algorithm recommends an action to each agent. So it's think of the driving directions on Waze. Every morning a bunch of people, show up and need to drive to work and need to choose their driving route. And, my choice of route can impact other people because of congestion. And then, the Waze can recommend the routes and convince people to do something socially optimal, that kind of stuff. So more formally, in each round, the algorithm chooses a distribution over the action profiles, and the solution concept is something called Bayesian correlated equilibrium. I won't go into the details of that, and the point is that, given that my recommendation is this particular action, I need to be incentivized to follow. In expectation over everything that I know, I need to be incentivized to follow that recommendation. So in this formulation, things get kind of very technical very fast, and so I'll only mention a few things that are kind of a few high-level things that make it different. One is that, before we used to have a condition that guaranteed us that all actions can be explored by a BIC algorithm. Now it's no longer the case, and we really need to think very carefully which action profiles can be explored and how to actually explore all of them. And then, okay, say we explored all we possibly can, and we have all that information. How do we use that information? Meaning, like, what is the best equilibrium achievable with that information, and how to converge on that equilibrium. So kind of these are the sort of high-level things to worry about in this model. And we sort of deliver on that. Okay, so enough for the technical part. I want to discuss one thing and present a few open problems. So I hope I have a few minutes to do that. So a thing that I want to discuss is a potential connection to medical trials. So you see, the basic design of a medical trial is, okay, you have a base treatment, or as opposed to a new drug, or maybe like a placebo or a new drug, and the patients are blindly and randomly assigned into one of the treatments, right? But some adaptive designs are studied and used, meaning like the algorithm could be, the trial could be adaptive, there could be more arms, there could be context, and so forth. So it's actually not a crazy thing to do, as evidenced by the talk on Monday morning by Don Berry. And so, okay, and in fact, the medical trials were one of the original motivations for Bandits. Okay, but one issue here is the patient's incentives. Why would a patient participate in this trial? Why would I subject myself to this new unknown drug, right? And it's especially major. So it seems like a major obstacle, and it seems especially so for widespread diseases and cheap drugs, when it's not difficult to find patients with the flu. It's not difficult, to pay for them, for their treatments. And in principle, every time I take ibuprofen for a headache, I could be contributing data to science, but somehow it's not happening. And it seems one big reason it's not happening is that incentives somehow are not aligned in the right way. So, one highly idealized way to think about it is to think of a medical trial as a recommendation algorithm. I show up and the trial tells me, okay, take this drug. And somehow I should believe that this is in my best interest to follow that recommendation. So conveniently, it is okay in the practice of medical trials not to reveal to the patients any information about the current state of the medical trial, which kind of matches our setting. We don't want to reveal anything that we don't have to reveal. And actually, it is very important to prevent selection biases in the medical trials. Like the best practices guide is very, very clear on that. And also kind of extension to context and extra feedback is kind of appropriate here because, the patients are different, they come with different contexts, and we can get a lot more extra information than just the, overall success of the treatment. So it seems kind of a, highly idealized maybe, one idealized way to, attack this issue. Okay, open questions. there is a whole bunch of open questions. One bunch is a sort of with ML flavor. I mean, you know, in the basic model, what is the optimal dependence on the prior? And we really don't know. What is the dependence on the number of actions? I mean, our current algorithm has exponential dependence, and it's not clear if one can do any better. There could be a lower bound for all I know. What if action space has some known structure like linear, convex, Lipschitz, whatnot? Can we use that and make it incentive compatible? And you know, some exploration happens anyway because people just like to explore. So how can we take advantage of that? And then a few more questions with a sort of economics or more game theoretic flavor. I mean, we'd like to have algorithms that are detail-free in the sense that, you know, the algorithm needs to know very little or like really nothing about the prior. And we have a result in that direction and we'd like to do more. And in particular, maybe it's possible to like not assume that we know stuff, but to elicit it. But you know, in that case, we need to be careful to make sure that agents are not incentivized to lie. Okay. And the other thing is, so in the BIC Bandit game that I just talked about in the previous slide, it may be possible to achieve big improvements both in regret and in the running time if the game has a succinct representation. I mean, if it's not just a crazily big and complicated game matrix, which we don't know, but say we know it has like, everything is linearly dependent on a single parameter. It should be easier, but it's not quite clear how to use that. And the last point I wanted to mention is that, we assumed that we only revealed the recommended arm. And we knew we could do it in theory if we know the prior by application of a revelation principle, and it was very convenient. But in practice, we may be required to reveal more information. We may, not, like if we don't need to reveal, then we maybe won't reveal. But what if we're required to do that? What if Amazon cannot just say buy this? Amazon needs to provide something like a rating. Then it becomes kind of more complicated in several ways. One is it's not even clear how to model this in a way that applies to many things at once, because what can and what must be revealed may be very dependent on the application. And it's very nice to have like an approach that applies to many things at once. I just don't know how to do that. And then, even if we knew how to model, well, it's a nice problem to solve. I don't know how to do it. So address that. Thanks, and sorry for going over time.
I guess there is one quick question while we...
Can you say a little about why the dependence on the number of actions is exponential?
That's a good question. The essential reason is that, initially we need to make sure that we sample each action a few times, and somehow it's not easy. We need, somehow we cannot sample, if initially, actions are ordered 1, 2, 3, we cannot sample action 3, we cannot convince the agent to try action 3 until we sample action 2, and somehow we need to jump through hoops to do that, and the only way we know how is exponential. I don't know. It seems there is some fundamental reason there, but we couldn't make it into a lower bound.
So let's